Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast, your home of everything Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson. I am your host once again this week for this episode of the Reserve Team podcast. With me today is Sean Matheson. Sean, how you doing, man?
Doing great, man. There's so much football coming thick and fast at the moment. And you and I, we were talking offline, both of our regular season footballs have started as well in the real world. So I feel like everywhere I turn at the moment, there's football content coming our way. So thrilled to be talking about through it with some of it with you today. And then also, really looking forward to kind of the run home for the rest of the season and seeing what twists and turns might happen in the final few weeks as the finals tend to take shape.
Absolutely. I'm loving all the football that's going on at the moment. It's super exciting, super entertaining as well. We've got plenty to talk about, mate, but it has been a little while since our last episode. The A-League season has been motoring along in our absence. And believe it or not, we're now entering the final stretch of the A-League season. We're about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the season, depending on the team. So today we're going to have a look at the run home for the rest of the season. We'll have a look at how the rest of the season could play out as the race for top spot heats up and the finals. And we'll sort of discuss where we think each team might finish, how they're looking heading in towards the backstretch of the A-League season. But mate, before we get started, just a quick reminder to check out the Weekend Recap, the other show we do here as part of the Reserve Team. Mate, you're on the Weekend Recap. It's a breakdown of all the results. You talk about all the action, all the talking points, all the events as well. That's on Tuesday nights. So make sure to check that out on YouTube or on Twitch as well, Shauno.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the good part. There's never a shortage of stuff to talk about relating to football, and we get to talk through the results from the weekend on that show. But with you, I get to break down some of the key topics and headlines from throughout the A-League season. So yeah, good to have a whole bunch of content coming everybody's way.
Absolutely. But, mate, we're going to talk about the run home. And before we get started, I want to take a look at where we stand. I think it's a good starting point to have a look at where the table is, because it has certainly changed quite a bit since the last time we were together on the podcast, mate. So sitting in top spot, our boys, Melbourne City. They are on 38 points with 12 wins, 2 defeats, 5 losses. They have built up a bit of a gap. The Central Coast Mariners sit in second on 32 points. Equal on points with them in third, we have Macarthur. In fourth, Sydney FC on 31 points. Just behind them, separated only by goal difference, we have Adelaide United on 31. Brisbane Roar round out the top 6. They're on 30 points. Western United and Western Sydney are just outside the final spots. They're both on 28 points in 7th and 8th. And Wellington Phoenix, sneaky Wellington Phoenix, a good run of form, has seen them leapfrog into finals contention as well. They're on 26 points. They are only 4 points outside of a final spot. There is a bit of a gap to the bottom 3 teams. We have Perth Glory on 19 points, the Melbourne Victory in 11th on 15th, and at the bottom of the table, the Newcastle Jets on 13 points. So that's where we stand at the moment. But, mate, I've got a question for you. Who do you think the hottest team in the league is? Since we've talked last, we've seen a bunch of games played, in particular with midweek as they've been coming thick and fast. Who's the hottest team in the league right now?
Oh, it's hard to go past City. I can't remember a season in the A-League, and I've watched every single one since I was a teenager. So I cannot remember a single season where at this late in the year or heading into this run home that there's been such a short point differential between a lot of the teams. And yes, it's a little bit skewed because different teams have played different amounts of games. But to be where we're at right now and have there only be 6 points between 3rd spot and 10th spot is absolutely ridiculous. So one, I think we've probably bitten off more than we can chew, trying to project how this is going to finish for the rest of the season and talk through the run home for a lot of these teams. But I think for every different side on any particular week, they feel like for really that kind of the final sides at the moment and really the top 10 would feel that they can beat any other side on the particular week if things go their way or if they get a good performance. And I think we've seen that fluctuate quite a bit throughout the course of the season. I think for a while, Central Coast were the best side in the division. I think Adelaide was excellent for a little while. Brisbane started strongly and they've come back into a good little run of form at the moment. But for right now, I can't go past City. City are so far just becoming kind of that automatic 3-point team. We saw the most recent fixture as well where when a goal behind during the course of the week, and in other years, other seasons, the Melbourne Hard era, that would have been enough for I think them to go on to lose 2 or 3-0 as they push for a winner. But they really just kind of kept going, stuck with their game plan and managed to turn around and get a good 3-1 result and a good performance. So I think with their games in hand, and we'll talk about through them their remaining matches in a little bit as well. I think they're really the team to catch, and they're the team that I think everyone's going to be looking at, thinking we need to be able to knock them off if we've got any realistic chance, not just of getting ourselves back into a top 2 finish and Champions League qualification spots, and also the final series and all that sort of thing. I think they really are looking at City as being the team that we have to beat, just so that we don't lose track of them and so that they don't get so far ahead in terms of points that no one can catch them in the remaining few games of the year.
Well, they sit 6 points clear on top of the table. They have got 1 game in hand over the Mariners in second and 2 games in hand over Macarthur, who are in third. So there is the potential that gap could widen. But as you said, mate, there's only a 6-point difference between the Mariners in second and the Wellington Phoenix in 9. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. I want to talk about the Wellington Phoenix in 9. We obviously have a little bit of City bias. We think City, as you said, you think City are the hottest team in the league at the moment. But I want to give a shout out to the Wellington Phoenix as well. They are undefeated in their last 5. They've got 3 wins and 2 draws in there. And they have really sort of elevated themselves into the finals race. I mean, we've seen them emerge from the lower end of the table now. And, 9th still isn't that high, but they are a shot and, an outside shot at a finals race, mate. Can you believe that the Knicks might make the finals?
No, not at all. And so in weekend recap, we kind of go through the ladder each week and kind of put a pencil line or a textile line, like a permanent line through teams if we think they're kind of done with that final series. And I'll be honest, there's a couple of different teams. Macarthur was one for me that I didn't think was going to turn the corner, and they've picked up a couple of big points after a bad run. Western Sydney the same way. I thought they were kind of done and heading in the wrong direction, and then a great performance in the derby may be the catalyst for them to turn their season around. Brisbane have won 4 of their last 5. Wellington, as you mentioned, 3 of their last 5. City have won 3 of their last 5. Like, there are a lot of teams that are really starting to click and hit top form. That's without talking about like Sydney FC, who always find a way to like win and get points and whatever else. They've not had a great season, but they still find themselves, only 5 points off top spot. So yeah, a ton of different twists and turns, a ton of different teams that are playing good football. Like it's been an excellent season. I think the ongoing trend I've seen in Twitter each weekend is people praising like the quality of football that we've had this season, the youngsters coming through, and the hashtag that I've been trying to use for the last month or so is best league in the world, because it really is. All of these teams are playing good, enterprising brands of football. All of them are effectively going out there trying to win games, and it makes for exciting football matches, and that's what we want.
Absolutely, mate. Well, those are the teams who are hot. I totally agree. It is the the best league in the world at the moment. It's super exciting. However, there are a couple of teams whose run of form is not quite as hot. So the Knots. I mean, for me, when you look at the teams who aren't playing very well at the moment, the Newcastle Jets stand out. I mean, I know we expected them to be rather poor at the start of the year. I think when we did our preseason predictions, we both had them finishing on the bottom of the ladder. But for all that's been made out about how bad the Victory have been, the Newcastle Jets are worse. So I think, that's sort of, they're kind of forgotten about. I think they're lucky that the Victory have had the kind of drama they have. They haven't won in their last 5. And another team who we saw leap out of the blocks at the start of the season, the Central Coast Mariners, they're winless in their last 5 as well. They have got 3 draws in there, but they are sort of not stuttering, but they're sort of limping towards the end of the season. What do you think about both of those teams, mate?
Yeah, look, I'd agree. I think for me, the bottom 3 sides, who we'll talk about in a little bit, Newcastle, Victory, and I'm going to throw them in that same bucket as well, Perth. I don't think they've got much left to play for other than pride. I don't think Perth for me aren't going to make finals, even though they've got games in hand, even though mathematically they can. They're just not playing that good a brand of football. But then at the same time, I think there have been teams that have been so far at the start of the season in the top 6 all the way through that haven't been in that great run of form. Like, I don't think Macarthur are playing that particularly well at the moment, even though they just won the other night. I don't think Western Sydney have quite, turned their season around the way that they'd be hoping, or the expectations that I think their fan base set for the start of the season under Carl Robinson. So yeah, it ebbs, it flows. Teams are having good patches, teams are having poor patches. I think for the flip side of the coin, you've really kind of got to look at how good are the performances at the moment. Maybe not necessarily relating to the results about how teams are shaping up heading to that final series. But for a lot of these teams, everyone's got a minimum of 6 games remaining. I think Macarthur's got 5 now that I've said that out loud. But, not just the points that they get, but also the performances that they take into that final series and the structures that they've got and the first team players available. Like, all that sort of stuff is really making for a fascinating conclusion to the season.
Absolutely. So, mate, we've had a look at where we stand. We've had a quick chat about who's hot. We've had a quick chat about who's not. Let's dive in. Let's take a look at the run home. We're going to start from the top of the table and work our way down. So that means we are starting off with Melbourne City. So they are on 38 points. When we have a look at the games that are still to come for them, they have to take on Brisbane, Adelaide, Wellington, the Central Coast, Brisbane again, and then they finish the season with the Newcastle Jets and then the Melbourne Victory. As we mentioned, mate, City have a 6-point gap on top. How many points do you think they need to secure the title? How many points do you think they'll get? And what do you think the biggest game remaining for them is?
I think for them to get the title, I think they need 4 wins from their last 7. But having said that, and people can see it on the screen at the moment, their last 2 games are against Newcastle and Victory, which, no disrespect to fans of either of those groups, I think even they would look at it and say, you know, City are probably going to steamroll both those teams. So for them, you kind of break it down even further and you look at that final 5 where they've got Brisbane twice, Adelaide, the Knicks and Central Coast. And if they can pick up, I think, 2 wins out of those 5 games, I think they will win the league because their run home is so good, those final 2 matches. Even though that final Victory derby hasn't been set like a permanent date yet or a permanent venue, I think that is probably going to be a win for City based on what we know from the previous 2 derbies this season, even though Victory have improved quite a bit for this season. But I think really what they need to do is get those points as early on as they can in this run home so that there isn't that kind of like, you know, overbearing weight that other teams are going to try and catch them up, or the pressure of performing, or they've got a lot of football coming. If you look at the structure of their fixtures, they just played on this Wednesday, they're playing again on Sunday, they're playing again the following Thursday, and then again the Sunday after that. So they're playing, I think, 6 games across a 3-week period by the time that full run of games is actually finished. And then they go into, again, games on the 22nd, 25th, 29th of May. So, like, they've got a lot of football coming. If they can get themselves into a scenario where they're not overthinking their matches too much and they're playing their brand of football, I think they will pick up those points, and I think they will potentially go and push on and really go into the final series with a fair bit of momentum. And what we've learnt from both Paddy Kisnorbo and now, because of Kisnorbo's injury, Des Buckingham, they just go out there and they try and play their style of football. They don't really change too much week to week. They're very forceful. I think they're very high intensity in their press, no matter what opposition they're coming up against. They're very quick in transition. They're very quick in possession, getting the ball forward as much as possible, trying to work 1v1 situations for their forward line. As far as I'm concerned, and I fully acknowledge my bias, and there's a good reason that we're doing City first, not just because they're top, but also it gets like it out of the way for the fans that don't want to hear us gush about City forever. Is that like it's theirs to lose at this point. I think having games in hand, having the points advantage they do, if they could really put their foot down and play some of their better football over the next few weeks, I could see the title scenario being kind of stitched up with 3 or 4 games to spare.
I agree. I think the 2 games that leap out for me as the most important would be the 2 Brisbane games as well. As we mentioned before, Brisbane are one of the teams who are hot. They are undefeated in their last 5. I think they got 4 wins in their last 5 games as well. Those are going to be 2 very interesting fixtures. Brisbane have a couple of games in hand as well, so those 2 games against City will have a lot of influence and impact, about where they'll finish. And one other thing that I've noticed as well is looking at that fixture, if I'm correct, 5 of those last 7 games are at home and 1 of those away games is against the Victory. So that could certainly work in City's favour as well. Being able to play in Melbourne, being able to play at home, that's going to be a huge advantage. And, mate, looking ahead to that Victory game at the end of the season, it's been a pretty torrid season for the Victory. But can you imagine if the title came down to the final day, the final game, Victory all of a sudden have everything to play for, having lost in the derby 6-0, having lost in the derby 7-0. They have a chance on the last day of the season to beat their rivals and stop them from winning the title. That could be, I mean, hopefully from a City perspective, we don't end up there. But, mate, that could be an interesting proposition as well. So how many wins do you think? You said 2 wins for City to win the league?
Yeah, I have a feeling, same as you, I look at the games that loom the largest for them as being the 2 Brisbane matches. Given that the Adelaide and Central Coast matches and Wellington games they're all good teams, make no mistake about that. I think City's advantage at home is going to be pretty good. Unless Wellington get like a great Mexican fan support at that match and the away end's rocking, which has happened a few times this season. But I look at those 2 as really being the danger game. So I would say potentially I think there's maybe a draw and a defeat in there. But then I think they're going to win the remaining 5 games of their season. I think they'll beat Adelaide at Amy Park. If it was away at Coopers, we never win there. So that's good that we've got this home fixture. I think they'll beat the Phoenix. I think they'll beat Central Coast. And then I think, Newcastle and Victory are pretty straightforward matches. But as you mentioned, if it comes down to the last day of the season, that will absolutely be when Justed comes up with a 90th minute header from a corner or something like that, just to break all of our hearts. But we can't complain. We've had a very fantastic season as far as derbies is concerned. Memories that will last with us now, I think, for a good few seasons and a good few years. So, yeah, we'll see how we go. I see them getting 5 wins, a draw, and a defeat from their remaining 7. I just think they're playing a very good brand of football, and I don't see... Given their poor run when they lost 3 games in a week earlier in a season, it came at a time when their team was chopping and changing quite a bit. I think Roston Griffiths was out. Aidan O'Neill was out. They've nearly got, with the exception of Daniel Atkinson, a full squad to pick from. And that full squad is playing exceptionally well. Guys like Mark Attilio, we saw make his second start during the course of the week. He was probably the best player on the park for me. And he's not getting ahead of Craig Noons, who is having his best season in the A-League so far. Andrew Naboot, who's back in Socceroos contention. So, yeah, for me, I think it's theirs to lose at this point.
I totally agree, but there are teams still chasing him down. The next team we're going to take a look at in second place is the Central Coast Mariners. They are on 32 points, 6 points behind Melbourne City. They came flying out of the blocks. They were sort of the fairy tale story of the early A-League season. It hasn't, I don't want to say that they've regressed, but they have sort of dropped back a little bit. That gap they had on top of the league has evaporated. They sit in second place. When we have a look at the games that they still have to come, they'll take on Brisbane, the Jets, Melbourne City, then they've got Macarthur, the Jets again, and they end the season facing Western United. Mate, do you think the Mariners still have a chance at winning the title? Whether it's a small chance at all. And if not, can they still finish second, or do you think that they might drop further down the pack? What do you think is going to happen?
So you kind of look at this from two different...
Mariners. Where do you see them finishing, and what's going to be the biggest game in store for them?
Yeah, I think you look at it from 2 different perspectives. If we're talking about the title picture, they absolutely have to beat Brisbane next Wednesday, and then they also have to beat Melbourne City away from home on the 22nd of May. They have to get, not just because the 3 points that they'll get in those matches, but they will prevent teams around them that are competing for similar positions from getting 3 points and creating that six-point buffer. I don't know if it will happen, to be honest, in either of those. I was actually impressed with Brisbane. Brisbane, for me, have kind of been a sleeper side over the last couple of weeks, where I haven't been paying that much attention, but then you look at kind of their 5-6 game form guide, and they're moving pretty freely, they're scoring pretty freely. I think Warren Moon has now settled on his best lineup, which is incredibly mobile, with Wenzel Halls and Dan Zaki, who's been fantastic, and he uses champness, even though I don't rate him. He is quick and he is fast. So, they're, I think, working themselves into a good run of form. Their biggest game that I think their fans will look at, or if their top 6 predictions are going to look at, their fans will be looking at the 2 Newcastle games, because I think that's really where they're going to try and capture hearts and minds on the Central Coast again. I would view that Central Coast versus Newcastle F1 derby on the 1st of June as being potentially the next 10,000 seat crowd that we get at Central Coast Stadium. It was fantastic to see a rocking crowd for the Sydney FC game a few weeks ago. I think they'll be looking at that fixture again as being a key one. But then if you're looking at their top 6 aspirations, let's say, for example, they lose to Brisbane and Melbourne City, playing against Macarthur, who are just a couple of points behind them, even though they do have games in hand, and finishing off the season against Western United, who have games in hand on everybody and are one of those sneaky sides that are really they're not playing a great brand of football, but they get a lot of men behind the ball, and they've got arguably the best player in the competition in Diamante, who can really take 2 or 3 guys out of a defensive structure with just one pass. So I think those 2 loom large on the horizon for them, but some huge fixtures. I still have faith in them to make the top 6 at the very least. I think the title's kind of done.
What about top 2? What about top 2 then? Are they going to finish? Are they going to finish second and get that first round bye?
They could, but there are 2 teams that I think loom larger, that I think kind of on the spectre of the horizon, that I view as being a little bit better than Central Coast right now. And the challenge for them hasn't been that they've been poor throughout this period. The big part is what we kind of all talked about throughout the start of the season, where their depth is not that great. Their 11 that they've put together is excellent. And arguably, I think, and people are happy to disagree with me on Twitter or in the comment section below. If you don't, shout out to Carly Carmichael, Marty Rayner, all the great Mariners fans that are involved in and around our community. I think their best period and their best passage of play was when Gianni Stensness was actually out injured and they were trying to work like a more conventional winger into a wide position and they had Nisbet and Bozanic in midfield. I thought that was perhaps their best run of form or their best run of performances. Then they brought him back in his quality and he is a very, very good player, but I think they've lost their way there a little bit in that structure, or they've become, I think, a team that, you know, is more easily read because you know what they're going to set up and do. You know where to shut down certain areas. If you can contain Matt Simon, if you can contain Ollie Bozanic at the base of midfield, you can stop quite a bit of their production and their outflow. So once one of those starting 11 players goes down, like Urena's suspension at the moment, you can see the depth coming in. Even Alu Kowal, who's been fantastic this season, like there is a drop off, I think, in that overall quality between their starting 11 and their, you know, next 3, 4, 5 guys that they bring into that side and into that squad. So, yeah, I think they can turn it around. I still pick them for top 6. I don't pick them for top 2, though.
Interesting. I think I agree. I think when we look at some of their recent results, I mean, they're not necessarily recent, but in their last 7 games, they've drawn twice against the Victory. The Victory have been absolutely nowhere. They've been shambolic, I guess you could say, to put it a little bit harshly, but, you know, they haven't been good. So you look at those 2 results against a bottom side and they couldn't get the job done. That's 4 points that they've missed out on that would totally change their outlook. That tightens the gap to the top and then gives them a buffer below. So I agree. I think I would like to see them finish top 2. I think it's going to be a challenge for them, though. What we're going to do, mate, we're going to move on, though. We're going to
before we do that,
yes.
I'll just quickly run through. So, and you can correct me if you think I'm incorrect in any of these ones. I think they're going to lose to Brisbane. I think they're going to beat Newcastle. I think they're going to lose to Melbourne City, draw with Macarthur, beat Newcastle again at home as their kind of like big marquee fixture, and then potentially draw with Western United late in the season. But I'm assuming, right, based on our calculations, which we'll go through at the end, that Central Coast Western United game to finish off the year, both a draw is enough for them both to get finals. We'll talk through that a little bit more as we go through some of these teams.
If that plays out as well, that'd give them 8 points. That'd take them up to 40, which you would surely think is enough to make the finals. But with, you know, that wouldn't be enough to finish top. So we'll see how it goes. Very interesting for the Central Coast Mariners. They can finish strong. I have a big soft spot for them. I'd like to see them in the top 2 as well. The next team we're going to talk about, though, mate, moving on to the 3rd place, Macarthur Bulls. Very interesting team, Macarthur. As you mentioned, they've played 21 games, so they only have 5 games remaining. Those games, though, are coming up against the Melbourne Victory, Perth Glory. They take on the Mariners, Western United, and then they end the season with Wellington. This is probably the team whose ladder position is the most deceptive in terms of making them look better than they are, I think. They're on 32 points, but then they have games in hand. They played additional games than all the teams around them. So let's have a look. They've played 1 more than the Mariners, 1 more than Sydney, and then 2 more than Adelaide, 3 more than Brisbane. So as those other teams catch up, we could see Macarthur, without playing, drop back down the table. But where do you see them finishing, mate? How many points do you think they'll get from the remaining games? Is top 2 a shot for them? And what do you think is going to be their biggest game remaining?
I don't know how they are at top 2. Effectively, they are top 2. They're level on points with the Mariners, but they're behind by goal difference. And to me, it's mind-boggling that they are so high on the table with a -3 goal difference or -2 or whatever it is at the moment. Like, I think that sums them up as a team, is that they had a game early on in the season as well where they beat Adelaide like 4-0. But other than that, I think pretty much all their victories have been like by a single goal, maybe 2 goal margins. Again, correct me in the comment section below if I've got that wrong. They don't impress me that much. I don't fear Macarthur, if that makes sense, when I look at like the fixture list and what teams you don't want to be drawing on a weekend, or what teams you don't look at as being 3 points throughout the course of that period. They should have lost to Melbourne Victory the other day, I felt, but they found a way to win, and good teams kind of do that. I don't think they play a great brand of football defensively or going forward. It's very possession heavy. It's very forcing passes perhaps when they're not there, or really relying, I think, on the individual quality of Extraberria, who is fantastic, and Susueta to an extent, and then experienced heads at the back like Milligan and whoever else who know how to do well in this division. James Meredith is another one that kind of comes to mind. So they've got players that have experience in the league. Federici is arguably, I think, the best goalkeeper in the division. So they've got individual quality and individual players that are doing quite well, but I don't think I've seen any games other than that Adelaide result, and even then that was close to game than I think what people realise the scoreline suggests. I haven't seen them belt a team. at any point and like really go and assert their dominance and control the match for 90 minutes. They started the season brightly, but I think a lot of the New South Wales sides did because they had the added advantage of being able to train together while the rest of the states were in lockdown or couldn't play interstate friendlies and all that sort of stuff. So I think that initial run was on the back of that. They're probably, better preseason program. And then at the same time, they've kind of plateaued, I think, for quite a while. Before that win during the course of the week, I don't think, had a win in their last 7, but they had picked up points. They had picked up draws. So they're a tough side to beat. They're a side that keeps the ball incredibly well, but they're not actually one, even though they're sitting in 3rd right now, that I kind of think will make the final series. They realistically, of the 5 games they've got remaining, I could see them losing all of them. But at the same time, I could see them getting scrappy, shitty draws and 1-0 wins throughout the course of that period. They're a hard team to gauge. I don't think they'll finish top 4, but I think they'll make finals. I think they'll get points against Victory and Perth Glory, maybe not wins in those games, but I think the head-to-head matches that they're having against other sides in those top positions, and yes, they drew with Melbourne City a couple of weeks ago, I could see the Mariners beating them. I could see potentially that game being a draw as well, because they might get something and then shut up shop quite a bit. I could see Western United being another boring draw. I could see Wellington beating them in that aspect. So they're probably, I think, on the table, the toughest team to gauge. But what are some of your thoughts on where they might finish?
Well, it's again, I'm going to agree with you thinking that they are one of the toughest teams to gauge. But at the same time, I look at those 5 fixtures. I go, they could win all of them. Victory and Perth, you think they would win. The Mariners, a tough one, but again, winnable. And then Western United and Wellington, 2 teams they're above. I could see. I don't know. I'm not going to say I can see them winning all 5, but it is a possibility. If you were to break them down head to head in each one, apart from the Mariners, they would be favourites probably in each of those matchups at the moment. So I think they're a tough one to gauge. I liked what you said about how you don't really fear MacArthur. I think I would agree with that. I did go back and have a look as well. Most of their wins are by 1 goal, as you said. So I think that, if you look at it, I don't know. I can see him getting 8 points, similar to the Mariners, 2 wins, a draw, and a couple of defeats in there as well. So I think they'll make the finals. I think they'll finish 4th or 5th based on that, mate. Would you agree?
Let's go through our results, right? And our projected points. We'll go with 7, which is 2 wins, a draw against Central Coast, which I think we called in the Central Coast match. So they'll beat Melbourne Victory, they'll beat Perth Glory away, and then I'm going to go with 2 defeats to finish the season against Western United and Wellington Phoenix. So that gives them 7 more points, 39 as a total, and we might see how that matches up against some of our projected totals for some of the other teams in the division, and we'll go through that table at the end.
Yeah, well, if we go based on that, I think the Mariners finishing on 40. So we think MacArthur behind the Mariners. But, mate, a team that sort of looms up behind them, coming up next, Sydney FC. They are in 4th place on 31 points. They have 6 games still to come. They're taking on the Newcastle Jets. Western United, the Melbourne Victory, a big derby against the Western Sydney Wanderers as well. That could be crucial for both teams. Then they finish off the season with a couple of tough games against Adelaide and Brisbane. The game that leaps out at me, well, there's 2 that leap out at me, is their toughest fixtures would be that derby against the Wanderers and then Brisbane to end the season. What do you think? That Brisbane game really could be, not a decider for the title, but maybe a decider for who finishes top 2. Something that we've seen in previous seasons is absolutely vital for making the grand final.
I don't disagree. They've got 2, the game against Western Sydney is obviously huge for their fan base and whatever else. The big one to me is that second last fixture against Adelaide United at Coopers. Traditionally, and Adelaide have been a bit up and down. We'll talk about them again in a moment, but they are fantastic at Coopers, and in big games, FFA Cup finals, set finals appearances at that stadium, that home ground advantage is huge. So I think if they're going into a scenario and situation in that second to last game of this season where they need to get 3 points to secure themselves a top 4 finish, or Adelaide potentially can leapfrog them with a win at that game, I view that one as being not just one of the biggest games for Sydney FC, but I think one of the biggest games for the complexion of the top 6 and the makeup of who's going to finish in those Champions League spots this off-season. So, yeah, for me, that's the biggest one. But like you mentioned, they've got a big blue still to come, which we know anything can happen in. Victory have improved defensively, maybe not going forward after the last game, but they have improved defensively. Western Sydney have just beaten them. It is now their chance to go back back to their home ground and try and get those 3 points back. And then they've got Brisbane, who are, like as we mentioned, arguably one of the better form sides of the competition. Western United, we know, can shut up shop against anybody and make it a frustrating afternoon. Even Newcastle, to an extent, the game coming this weekend, I think that's probably even a more challenging fixture than they'd look at because of, the pressure that's going to be on Newcastle is relatively low for their season, and they're really just playing for pride and try and pick up points and try and re-engage their own fan base. So yeah, some huge fixtures coming up for Sydney FC, but like you mentioned, Sydney FC, like they are Sydney FC. This is what they do every season. They don't have to play that well to get points. They don't have to be the best team in the competition to finish on the top of the league as far as like the playing capacity of that group is. They're arguably, I think, the most experienced and seasoned squad in the league as far as finals appearances are concerned, as far as league titles won, and really their kind of dynasty period over the last five or six seasons has been the longest reign of any team towards the top of the league. So for these guys, I think are potentially one of the biggest ones looming as a top two finish. I don't think they're going to get that top spot. I don't think they can get the Premier's plate at this point. I think it would be down to one of the other sides that potentially has an easier run of fixtures on the way home. But again, knowing Sydney the way that we do, knowing that Le Fondre is coming back into this squad, I think they are probably going to pick up 3 to 4 victories from these final 6 and really put themselves in a commanding position heading into the final series.
Yeah, well, a couple of things that I want to note on Sydney FC this year as well. They've not felt as invincible as they have in previous seasons. In years past, it's sort of been a bygone conclusion that they're going to dominate, they're going to win the league, they're going to be incredibly tough to beat. While they are still a difficult team to face, we have seen that they are susceptible to losing. I know that's a bit of a weird way to phrase it, but they're not as invincible as they once were. I mean, if we look at their recent form, they've only lost 1 out of their last 7 games, but they've also had 3 draws in there as well. So they're getting results, but they're not just steamrolling teams as well.
Worth mentioning those 3 draws against the Mariners, against Adelaide United, and I've forgotten the other one already, but it was someone else towards the top 6 sides anyway. So they're not, and that's where I think the big result
Melbourne City.
Melbourne City, thank you. That's where I think the big result kind of comes in, where they aren't losing points differentials to the other teams around them. They're not losing 2 points or 3 points ground on those teams. And that's where I think they're well positioned, is that they're doing well against the other top 6 sides. They're not just like a MacArthur, only beating Perth and Victory and Newcastle at the moment. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. But how many wins do you think they can get from their final 6?
So having a look, I reckon 10 points is what I think. I think they beat the Jets. I think they beat Western United. I think they beat the Victory. So that's 9. I'll be conservative. Let's say they get a draw against the Wanderers. That takes them to 10. And then let's say worst case scenario, they lose to Adelaide, lose to Brisbane. 10 points, that takes them to 31. So that takes them above MacArthur. It takes them above the Mariners in terms of our projected points totals, which, full disclosure, could be totally wrong, mate. But that's the way that we see it playing out. And then you head into those last 2 games, Adelaide and Brisbane, where I think they're going to be the real keys to whether or not they finish top 2. Even if they were to lose both of them, I think, that still gives them 10 points, takes them to 41. But if they were to, maybe pick up a draw, as you said, at Coopers and even beat Brisbane, then, top 2, second spot is by no means out of the question there. What do you think about that?
I'm happy to go along with that. I think those games against Brisbane and Adelaide, they are a toss-up. Like, who could actually pick, what way they're going to go, given that it's only, 2 weeks away, but it feels like, as far as football is concerned and the way that the season's twisted and turned, it could be a million miles away as far as the overall complexion of the league itself is. So, yeah, we'll go with the next 3 they're going to win: Newcastle, Western United, Melbourne Victory, a draw in the Derby, and losses to Adelaide and Brisbane to close out the year. So, we'll see how that shapes up against a few of the different teams, including the next team that we're going to talk about.
Yes, but one other thing that I want to say just before Sydney, sorry, that we haven't even mentioned, Le Fondre coming back.
Yeah.
What is that going to mean? That could, totally change their season, where they've struggled to score goals. We've seen for Melbourne City the impact that a prolific goal scorer in Jamie McLaren can have. We've seen in previous seasons the impact that Le Fondre had for Sydney. So if he comes back and he hits form, look out. It's sort of like Bobo, where, okay, he's a little bit older, but, he's got the runs on the board, and come finals time in a 1-game situation, just have that ability to perform on a big stage and put the ball in the back of the net. So if Le Fondre comes back, and if he is maybe even half as good as he has been for them in previous years, Sydney become very, very dangerous, I think, as well. Maybe not unbeatable, but exceptionally dangerous. But that is enough on Sydney. We are now going to move on to the next team who have had a bit of a roller coaster season, Adelaide United. They sit in 5th place on 31 points. They still have plenty of games in hand. They still have 7 to play. They will take on Wellington Phoenix, Melbourne City, the Brisbane Roar. Then they've got a little bit of an easy stretch with Perth and the Victory in back-to-back games before finishing off with Sydney FC and the Wanderers. What do you think for Adelaide United? At patches, they've looked super exciting. They've looked super good. And then they've had some dry spells as well. Where do you see them finishing at the end of the season? Do you think they're going to be one of the hot teams? Are they a chance at top 2?
I do think they are a chance at top 2. And the reason I say that is they've got 4 of their 7 remaining at home. And I think Coopers is arguably, and maybe Amy Park for City is the only other comparable one at the moment where, and potentially maybe even Redcliffe because it's a bit underwater at the moment and Brisbane seem to handle it well. But like the home ground advantages, I think they've done really well at Coopers throughout the course of this season. I think that's where they've found their consistency. It is their away performances that haven't quite matched or like caught up to that particular portion at any point. We spoke about earlier when we talked about MacArthur, that 4-0 defeat away from home. I think some of the away games that they've got coming could be trickier than perhaps we're looking at. So like Phoenix is a huge game for them. One to really, and this is the other thing as well. I think, I say this as a City fan, games in hand doesn't mean wins. So, we continue to talk about that, and we'll talk about that more when we get to some of the other sides as well. It just really, for me, projects that, you've got the opportunity, and it's how you respond to that pressure. We've seen at different points, Brisbane have quite a few games in hand. We've seen at different points, Perth have quite a few games at hand. The Victorian sides, when we went back into lockdown briefly, had a few games in hand. That doesn't necessarily translate to say that you're definitely going to win and get 3 points in those matches because it can shake out entirely differently. And the pressure that comes from going into a game knowing you have to win it as your game in hand to try and get back up the table does put some pressure on teams. And Adelaide are a young side. Like, as much as we kind of want to talk about the experienced heads and whatever else, they do have in their core and in their key elements of their structure some relatively young players that are super important for them. So it'll be big, I think, for the older players in the squads, the Goodwins, the Uriches, the Jakobsons at the back, to really coach those young players through it and get the most out of it. But if they get through this run of form and get themselves like a top 2, top 3 finish and get into finals football, I think that home advantage at Coopers could destroy quite a few teams. So for me, and I'm happy to go through your results, I think they'll beat Wellington because it's at Coopers. I think they'll probably win all their games at Coopers, to be honest. I think they'll lose to City away at Amy Park because City are just very, very good at the moment. I think potentially that game against Brisbane looms as being their biggest one for the season, depending on how Brisbane's games in hand go. I think Perth Glory away is trickier than they think, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they pick up at least a point there. I think they'll pick up at least a point against Melbourne Victory, even though Victory are improved. I think they'll potentially beat Sydney FC in that game at Cooper Stadium. It's kind of their grand final, and I think they'll beat Western Sydney as well to finish off their season. So I think there are wins still to come from them, and I think they're going to leave them in a really commanding position heading into that kind of like finals race.
I mean, it's going to be tough. I think just touching on those home games remaining, those home games are against the teams who are around them as well. The away games that they have to face are Perth away. Again, a tricky opposition, but they should be beating Perth from what we've seen from them. They're a better team than Perth. While it's a tricky away day, they should be winning that. And then the same for the Victory. While they aren't as shambolic as they were previously in the series, previously in the season, they should be beating the Victory as well. So most of those big games against those teams, Brisbane and Sydney FC and the Wanderers at the end of the year, are at home. So that's going to be a massive advantage. So if we have a look, so they still have to play the Phoenix at time of recording. They haven't played yet. So you think a win there. So that's 3 points. Lost to Melbourne City. Brisbane Roar, let's say a draw.
Yep.
What do you think? So that takes them to 4. I reckon they'll beat Perth, that's 7. I reckon they'll beat the Victory, that's 10. Sydney FC, you think they have an advantage being at home. Let's say a draw, just in case. That takes them to 11. And then I think they beat the Wanderers at home. So that takes them to 14. And, again, we've thrown out 7 predictions there. So some of them might flip.
So what I will say is that we did call the Sydney FC game as being a defeat against Adelaide. So do we want to try and make that a win as well?
Yep, let's do it. Yep.
So that actually has them winning 5 of their remaining 7 games.
So that takes the
16 points to 47.
Yep. Oof.
So it starts to get real tight. And that would be a top 2 finish if we're projecting it incorrectly. And I think even if they lose one of those additional games, based on what we think Sydney is going to do, I think Adelaide, for me, are the favourites to get that top 2 finish.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I suppose, yeah, when you put it that way, yeah. I think assuming that they're going to beat Brisbane is a tricky one. So if I don't know.
We can change that. We can change that one. Let's take that Brisbane result and make it a loss. And even then, that still puts them into second spot.
44.
Yeah. And let's say that, for example, even if they lost to Sydney FC, they'll still finish above them. Oh, no, will they? No, they won't. So that game's going to be huge. So that would put Sydney FC on 44 points and Adelaide on 42. So that's the tiny little ebbs and flows, the difference between Adelaide finishing that top spot and whatever else. That game for me is the biggest one remaining this season, I think, which is crazy to say.
Well, yeah, it's going to be those. It always is, but the results against the teams around you. So Sydney and Brisbane, you look at them and you go, that could really be the difference between top 2 first round bye, or if they were to lose both, they finish 5th, then they have to play away in the first round of the finals and get knocked out. So
let's do it this way, right? Let's say that they're going to lose to City and to Brisbane, right? Let's give Brisbane the benefit of the doubt. Remember that when we come to Brisbane up next. And then let's say that the Sydney FC game is going to be a draw. So we've gone back and given Sydney FC an additional point, taking them to 42. And that would give Adelaide United, what's that, 12 and 13? No, 44. So they'd finish on 44 points in second position as the season, or as we're projecting here. It's fascinating stuff, because it's like literally 1 and 2 results that we don't get correct here, and the entire complexion of that top 6 changes entirely.
Definitely. Well, I think Adelaide, what we can sum up, while we might not have the predictions right, I think we can agree that they probably, of the teams we've talked about so far, have the highest ceiling. They're the team that we can see climbing the most on the table. The other team who I think would be on the same level is the team we're going to talk about next, Brisbane. And we mentioned that key Adelaide United Brisbane fixture, so that ties in nicely to them. So they sit in 6th place. They are on 30 points. As you said, games in hand do not result in wins, but they too have a bunch of games in hand and still to play. So they are taking on Melbourne City this week, and that is going to be massive for them. Then they've got the Central Coast Mariners, Adelaide, the Newcastle Jets, then Melbourne City again, the Western Sydney Wanderers, and Sydney FC. So they, when we talked about at the start, Brisbane Roar are in, we had Brisbane Roar in the hot section, but man, that is a tough run home. 2 games against City, at Adelaide, and then end the season with Sydney. Where do you see Brisbane ending up, mate?
So we've already kind of talked through some of these fixtures. So I think we picked, for the Melbourne City game, the game this Sunday, a draw in that one. We picked them to beat Central Coast Mariners in the Mariners results. We picked them to beat Adelaide United in Adelaide's results that we just spoke about. Newcastle, I think we chalk up as being a win. Brisbane versus Melbourne City in Brisbane, I think we put that one down as being a Brisbane win. I may have to go and check the tape on that one. Then Western Sydney, Perth Glory, and Sydney FC to finish. Some chaotic results there. We actually picked them as well, talking through Sydney's results, for them to beat Sydney. So like we're projecting Brisbane to actually get quite a few points, arguably the most points of any side throughout the course of that. So we may need to talk through some of those big fixtures and kind of pick the revised results. For me, Adelaide and Sydney FC loom as being the 2 large ones. Realistically, Brisbane could make a top 2 finish, and they could really push on and be part of that top 4 group. But we know that they have had issues throughout the course of a season with consistency, week to week. And they've chopped and changed their squad, I think, quite a bit. I don't know if there's a correlation between Scott McDonald's release and them immediately getting a few good results on the trot. I don't know if there's a correlation between Tom Aldred's injury and then moving to a back 4 and Macaulay Gillespie stepping in as more of a central defender and the points that they've picked up in that period. So there's quite a few ifs, I think, with this Brisbane squad. I think we may have to revise some of the results that we've kind of highlighted against Adelaide and Sydney FC, but even then, even when we take those 2 out, like the Adelaide match, there's a lot of points here for them to grab. I think they can beat Central Coast. I think they can beat Newcastle. I think they can beat Western Sydney and Perth Glory, and just that as a minimum would be enough to push them up into that kind of top 2 finish discussion, and potentially above Sydney FC and Adelaide.
Yes, and one big disclaimer here is we are aware that we might be contradicting ourselves with these results. It's so hard to predict, man. This season has been so epic. It's been so topsy-turvy. We've seen, so many surprising results. I think what we can agree on is similar to Adelaide United, Brisbane have a lot of potential upside. If the side we've seen in the last 5 weeks is the real Brisbane Roar, then that upside, that ceiling is very, very high. But as you said, they've been inconsistent. And I think of all the teams we've spoken about so far, they do have the most difficult run home. They do have a lot of question marks. I can see them losing twice to Melbourne City. I can see them losing to Adelaide. I can see them losing to Sydney. So all of a sudden, that's 4 defeats in their last 7 games, in which case their ceiling doesn't look so good. And then that's, again, assuming that they beat the Wanderers, who could have a lot on the line. And I think that's where, it's just, man, I don't know. It's so hard to predict. So all right, here we go. Let's put it on the line. Who's going to finish higher, Brisbane or Adelaide?
I think Adelaide, because I think Adelaide's home advantage for me at Coopers is a bigger advantage and a big disadvantage to opposition sides than Redcliffe is. But I think Adelaide have easier games at home. I think some of the Redcliffe games that, Brisbane are playing against Sydney FC, against Melbourne City, are also going to kind of count against them in that fact. They're playing a high quality of opposition. So maybe we're trying to figure out here where their wins are going to be, like where are their draws going to be, where are their drop points going to be, who's potentially going to put a surprise or two in there. We haven't spoken about them yet, and we will after we do our Hall of Fame stuff, but have Western Sydney turned a corner with that result against Sydney FC, or is that a bit of a flash in a pan moment for their fan base? It's really difficult to tell at the moment. Should we go through them one by one? We'll write down our results and I'll check if they are actually contradictory to what we said when we talked about the first team. So you think that they'll lose against Melbourne City?
I think the first game they will, yes.
We initially had that down on a draw, so we'll adjust that and we will up to our projected points total for City as well at the end. We think they're going to beat Central Coast?
Yes.
We did have that for the Central Coast result. Adelaide United versus Brisbane Roar. This one is a big one. We had them down to win it away from home.
We've had both. We said both. And so, here's the thing as well.
We can change it to a draw. We can change it to a draw if we can't split it.
Well, let's say it's a loss. Let's say it's a loss at Adelaide. I think we had Adelaide winning, or we had Brisbane winning.
We had Brisbane winning, but then that puts Adelaide even further up ahead, and this is the tough part about it.
Oh, yeah.
Let's split the difference. Let's just say a draw, right? Let's just put a draw down and we can maybe loop back on that in a second. They should beat Newcastle, realistically, away from home. Yep. Brisbane versus Melbourne City in Redcliffe.
Well, that could be an interesting one, because something that we haven't really spoken about yet is the context of some of these games and these matchups. If they're playing City at home and City have more or less wrapped up the title, if City need one win out of the last 3, and they have to beat either Brisbane or the Jets or the Victory, they don't have the same aggressiveness going into that game, whereas Brisbane, who might be chasing a top 2 spot, might be. So that's something that we haven't really sort of seen. So let's assume that City at that stage are on the cusp of a title. Brisbane need to win more. Let's say Brisbane were to get that. Yep.
Sure. And then Western Sydney away. That's a tough one.
It is a tough one. Let's say draw.
Let's say draw. Okay. Remember that for when we come back for Western Sydney in a little bit. Perth at home, I think, is a win.
Yep. I didn't have Perth at home on my list. They have 8 games, on my list. Sorry, mate.
All good. I've got you. As far as the graphic is concerned and what everyone is talking through, they're all up to date. So we're all good there. And then they finish off the season against Sydney FC at a home venue on the 5th, maybe not the 5th of June, but on a date and time to be confirmed. We had that down as a Brisbane win when we spoke about Sydney FC. How are you feeling about that one?
I still think Brisbane win, but I just think, I don't know, man. It's going to be tough to lock in our final predictions. I think as we talk through it, there's just so many possibilities, so many ebbs and flows, and some of them we're going conservative when we're making these predictions, so worst case scenario, or not worst case scenario, but in our most realistic scenario, where does Sydney go? Where did Brisbane go? Where do Adelaide go? So I think that's where we start getting contradictory, is when we play it safe. But I don't know, mate. I would say Brisbane, yep.
Okay, so we'll go through it at the end. Let's not tell anybody what the projected points are, because I think I kind of want to surprise you with it a little bit as well. But we will go with a Sydney defeat and a Brisbane win to close out their final game of the season, whenever that one is actually ends up being scheduled. But that I'll tell you now, that does make for some fascinating reading, and we'll go through that at the end.
Great. I'm very aware that we might have contradicted ourselves about 5 times in there. I don't know what I've said, but mate, we're going to take a break, which is going to be good because it gives us a little bit of time to compose and to calm down and rethink some of these results. Because, mate, I'm excited, if nothing else, could be totally wrong, but I am nothing if not excited to see how the season plays out. But mate, what we're going to do now though is jump into the Hall of Fame section.
All right, so I'm going to take the lead back off you here because you've done such a fantastic job walking us through the top 6 scenario and all of these different different mathematical equations that we're trying to figure out relating to points remaining, and go through our Hall of Fame results, because it has been a couple of weeks and I don't know if you actually know this result yet or if you even saw the Twitter poll, because I forgot to do it until very, very late in that following week. But going in with 62% of the vote, the Mariners pitch invader. I don't know what it is, Branson, about your nominations relating to Central Coast and why they seem to always go in the Hall of Fame. There is something about that club and you in particular that is just a happy partnership. But he goes in beating the Hindmarsh Cat, who had 48% of the vote. Oh, no, sorry, 38% of the vote by the time the initial votes were tallied. So you're starting to catch me up, mate. A few more results coming back in. You are starting to get a few more inductees there on that magnificent collage, which is filling in very quickly. But anything that you wanted to touch on for the Mariners pitch invader? Do you want to give them a shout out or anything like that?
No, I think that's a good result for the integrity of the Hall of Fame. I think I've spoken a lot about recency bias and how that might alter some things here, but I think the Mariners pitch invader stands the test of time. We've already forgotten about the Cooper's Cat and what's it even doing these days, whereas that Mariners guy, I think he is iconic, and I think he will and already has stood the test of time, so it's good that he's immortalised in the Hall of Fame, mate. Absolutely.
A worthy winner. But that does bring us back to our nominations for this week. So, being that you are the reigning champion now, given that you have, going in on the back of your victory last week, who are you going to nominate for the Hall of Fame results this week?
Well, I'm going to take a different path. I'm going to nominate someone who's actually already in the Hall of Fame, but I'm going to nominate them for a different reason. I want to nominate Riley Dobson as well. I know she's already in there for the proposal, but I want to nominate her for becoming the first woman to play in the FFA Cup. I think that is a fantastic achievement. She, of course, retired at the end of the W League season, two-time W League champion with Melbourne City, retired early to spend more time with her partner. And she spent more time with him by playing for the Bulwarra Lawn Bush Rangers. I believe her partner is either the coach or a coach there. Matt Stoneham is his name, sorry. But yes, Riley Dobson, I think she deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame for being the first woman to play in the FFA Cup. I think that's an amazing achievement, and hopefully we see more players potentially doing this for local sides as well, mate.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because I actually didn't know that was allowed, like if it was a rule that could happen. But potentially, FA Cup competition, they've set a precedent now. So who knows? Maybe we're going to see like Lisa Devanna or, one of the other fantastic players from throughout the the W League season and WNPL competitions making duplicate appearances. There's a couple of W League players playing for the likes of Heidelberg and South Melbourne and whoever else. Maybe we see some of their familiar international faces in that competition a little bit earlier on in the stages. I think that Lambton Jaffers is who they played against. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, they are one of the bigger teams in the Newcastle region. So it was very much like an underdog story and a marquee signing coming in that Full Matildas International. So I think they lost 13-0 as well. So the result didn't go their way, but still a fantastic shout out and great of them to do something that,
literally breaking barriers, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it brings, this is what we want. Magic of the Cup. These are the stories and stuff that we want. We've got the Duck in there. We've now got Raleigh in there. Well, we might have Raleigh in there, depending on how it goes. I don't think my nomination will beat it, unless there is that recency bias that we're kind of talking about. But I'm going to go with... Again, we've been very critical of Fox Sports, and they do suck. Good riddance to them. I'm counting down the days and the games until we don't have to listen to them anymore. And arguably the worst portion of that, depending on who you ask, is Archie Thompson's sideline commentary and halftime interview skills. But the other night, was it last night or the night before, they did a live cross to Mark Milligan, who obviously wasn't quite aware that he was on screen and live at that particular time. Fantastic records with the likes of Danny McBreen and a few other people saying things on air that they weren't aware was being broadcast out, where he called... Rudy Gestede, the worst striker to ever play for Melbourne Victory at halftime of a game. Obviously, Gestede didn't have that great a performance. It was a 2-1 victory for Macarthur in the end, but Victory could have won that match had things gone a little bit differently, or if they had had a different guy up front, maybe. I just thought that was hilarious. That's not really something that you get to see and hear, that sort of insight into the sledging that may happen on the pitch, or what was, I think, supposed to be a private conversation between two ex-teammates. But yeah, fascinating to get that read on what Mark Milligan thought of what has become of Melbourne Victory and what he thought about the opposition striker that he was coming up against. So one of those best league in the world type moments. So fantastic for that.
Yeah, definitely. That is a very good nomination as well. And without getting too into it as well, sort of raises a can of worms, opens, not even raises a can of worms, opens a can of worms and gets you wondering how former players, if they still feel that attachment to their former teams. Of course, Milligan, former Victory captain, and we saw in the Champions League, who was it, Eden Hazard, celebrating with some of the Chelsea players after his Real Madrid side were knocked out. So I don't know, maybe players do sort of care about or have more feelings for ex clubs than they do for their current clubs. So that would be an interesting discussion to have. But, mate, we also still have a very interesting discussion to have. We've been talking about the run home, looking at the rest of the season and how it might shape out. We've gone through the top six. We've managed to get through there with hopefully minimal contradictions. We're going to crack on with the remaining teams now. Let's get into it, mate. So, the team we're going to talk about next, the 7th place Western United. So, their game's still remaining, and let me know if I've missed any, because I missed a Brisbane one apparently. They still have to play the Western Sydney Wanderers, Perth Glory, Sydney FC, Wellington, the Melbourne Victory, Macarthur, and the Mariners. Have I got them all there, or have I missed one?
Nailed it. Crushed it.
There we go. Thank you. So, they are in 7th place. They're on 28 points, 2 points behind Brisbane. How do you see Western United seasons playing out, mate? Are they going to make the top six? How high can you potentially see them going? Again, avoiding contradictions. What do you think their ceiling is? Where do you think we can expect them to come?
I think they'll make the 6, but I'm not sure who at the expense of. I think that's the challenge. And maybe doing this projected points total is going to help us a little bit with that, because we'll actually see mathematically how they can make that happen. I don't really like Western United. I hate their coach. I think they carry themselves very poorly. Watching their games is like an exercise in frustration, which it shouldn't be, because they've got Diamante, who's a joy to watch. They've got some fantastic players. I really rate Connor Payne and Dylan Pereira as their two wingbacks. I think they're arguably the best wingback combination in the division itself. So they've got a lot of good stuff about them, but they just play such an unattractive brand of football outside of Diamante, and then at the same time, they also just carry themselves in a kind of really shitty way, where they are big and gangly. They've got great players, so Thomas Leibel-Skok, I think, is tremendously underrated and a huge, I think, case study for why people need to look at NPL recruitment more aggressively, about how easily he's transitioned to being, I think, an elite level A-League defender. And they've got some good quality in their imports as well, with Grauchena and Sanchez, and even though I hate him, Bashar Berisha, because he does pull out fantastic finishes every time we play against them. So look, they've got that ability, and I think when you list through those names, that's an experienced group, both at an A-League level and internationally as well. So that's kind of why I put them in a box seat to get a top 6 position. If I was to go and pick a team out that I think they'll get above, it would be Macarthur. But then we know from what we've already spoken about with Macarthur, they, based on their run home, are going to pick up quite a few points. So potentially maybe that drags them more into the conversation with the likes of Brisbane, with the likes of Central Coast. How do they get above and beyond those teams? And they've got the games here to do it, but you'd think with that aging a squad, and they don't have the best depth as far as their overall squad is concerned, how are they going to pick up those points? Where are they going to pick up those points? How are they going to go in their big games against other sides in and around the same positions in the division that are potentially going to be trying to pick them off to get a leapfrog on that position? So Western Sydney to start with, tomorrow night, Saturday night at time of recording, and likely time of release as well. They are playing them away from home. That's a tough one, but if they get a go-ahead goal, I think they are arguably the best team at shutting up shop and getting 6 bodies behind the ball and letting Diamante try and release someone on the counter-attack. Perth Glory away, I'm not really a big rap on Perth at the moment. I don't think they're playing a good brand of football, so I think that's realistic for them. Western United versus Sydney FC. I cannot remember where this fixture is actually taking place. It may be at Amy Park, but that's a huge one for them as well. If they get points there, I think that pretty much secures them a top 6 finish. Wellington Phoenix will be a huge kind of top 6-pointer, depending on how the Knicks go the next few weeks. Melbourne Victory, they've had a pretty good run against this season. Macarthur, I think potentially they could beat as well. And then Central Coast to close out the season could be absolutely huge. That potentially, if we've gotten it wrong and results don't go the way that we're projected, potentially that looks at being whichever of those sides wins or gets points goes into that kind of top 6 scenario. So they've got some huge fixtures, and I think because they've got games against other teams in the top six with them or in that kind of top six discussion, I think they arguably will go into each of these matches going, the next game is our grand final. The next game is our grand final. And once you're in that mindset, once you're in that mentality of must win individual games, going into the final series, knowing how good they can be defensively, knowing how good Diamante is, they might be the smoky that I think gets into the top six, but a lot of teams don't want to get drawn against because of the structure and the style with which they play. But what are you thinking? Where's your head at?
I think the ceiling for Western United would be fourth. I think that would be as high as they could go, probably having a potential home final. I don't think they're going to make top two. I think that is a stretch too far. I don't think they're good enough. I think they're in a similar boat to Macarthur, where you look at some of these fixtures, and a lot of them are 50-50. You know, the Wanderers away, that could go either way. Then you've got Sydney at home, maybe, maybe not. Wellington, maybe, maybe not. Macarthur, maybe, maybe not. And then the Mariners, again, another 50-50 game to end the season, where it's like, if they're able to get wins in two of those four, which I don't think would be out of the question, again, I think that would see them moving into the top six. But then the question becomes, which two are they going to get those results against? You know, if they lose, I don't know. It's tough to predict. You know, if they don't beat Macarthur and if they don't beat Sydney, who are two teams that are probably the most catchable, or even the Mariners, it's, as you said at the start, it's hard to see who they're going to knock out. So for me, I think they might find themselves on the outside looking in, just to be honest. Let's break down the results, you know. So the Wanderers, what do you think?
So before we go through that, I think they're on 28 points right now. They've got 7 games remaining. I think they need 4 wins from their final 7 to make the top 6. So that's, I think, the marker that we're looking for. So if we pick out the easiest results there and then kind of work our way backwards, I think they'll beat Perth Glory away from home. I think they'll beat Melbourne Victory. So that's 2. So then they need a remaining 2 victories from their last 5. I think they'll beat Wellington, even though it's away from home. Is that one of the 2 Wellington games in New Zealand? I cannot remember. I don't think it is. I think it's Perth and Sydney.
So Wellington, yes, it is.
It is one of the NZ games.
However, the COVID situation, New Zealand, I believe they paused the travel bubble with New South Wales arrivals. So it is slated to be in New Zealand. They have started selling tickets for that game in New Zealand. However, who knows? Yeah,
so I think, let's say that they don't beat Wellington. If that game's in NZ, I'm backing Wellington. Let's go with that. Then I think they're going to beat Macarthur. And we did say earlier that they were going to beat Macarthur. And I think we said that they were going to draw with the Central Coast. So that really only brings it down to how are they going to perform against Western Sydney? How are they going to perform against Sydney FC? Those are the 2 big games. If they pick up, I think, even 3 points in one of those matches, I think that secures them a top 6 finish. And it potentially, based on what we're projected, could get them above some of the teams that we've already spoken about, which is crazy to think, given that they were sitting 10th and 11th not that long ago.
Yeah, so let's put the runs on the board. So the Wanderers, what do we have?
I think they will get a draw.
Okay, so 1 point there. 4 points because they'll beat Perth.
Yep.
They're on 7 because they'll beat the Victory. Did we say they were going to beat Macarthur?
They've got Sydney FC next, and I think we could say, based on what we spoke about earlier, that Sydney will beat them.
Okay, so let's say losses in their next 2 against Sydney and Wellington, assuming that's in New Zealand. Win against the Victory, that takes them to 7. And what did we say about Macarthur and the Mariners?
So the Mariners, we have them drawing, and I think against Macarthur, they will beat them.
Okay, so that's 11 points.
So that would put them on 39, which is level with another team. So potentially we might have to expand ours into goal difference and whatever else, but we will go through that once we get to it. So, yeah, fascinating to see what that might actually look like. They are a smoky, but I think really well positioned based on their run home to really make a... There's quite a few teams that are aiming for 6th. You mentioned top 4 as their ceiling. I don't disagree with that, but that 6th spot is where I think quite a few different teams are actually looking and saying, how do we get there? How do we just sneak our way into finals? And then that's success for them. So, yeah, we'll talk more about that, I guess, with our next team as well.
Absolutely. Well, the next team, let's get into it, is the Western Sydney Wanderers. So they are on 28 points in 8th place, just sitting behind Western United on goal difference. Their remaining games, they've got Western United, Perth Glory, Sydney FC, the Wellington Phoenix, Brisbane and Adelaide. What do you see happening for Western Sydney for the rest of the year, mate?
Nothing good. to be honest. Man, like, look, they got a fantastic result against Sydney FC and they started that game phenomenally well, but they also almost lost it from a very, very winnable position where if Bebeau finishes that penalty, I have a feeling that Western Sydney fold like a deck of cards. If they went two ahead and that first 15 minutes was excellent, that was exactly what you need to do against Sydney FC and a good archetype for a lot of other teams to look at how to play them early on in games and early on in stages where you really try and disrupt their rhythm. And I think the stubbornness of Corica means if you get an advantage in a game and he's not going to make subs till the 85th minute, you're really putting yourself in a good position to try and win the match. So that was excellent. But before that, they would dire for, I think, 7 games without a win. And I didn't see enough. So it's different in derbies. Back when I was a Melbourne Heart supporter, like seasons 1, 2, 3 of Melbourne Heart as a club, we were terrible, but we would always get up for a derby. And I think that might be kind of a false flag at the moment where Western Sydney fans will now look at it as being, okay, we've turned the corner, we're going to go win the next 4 games. I don't think they are. I think that was really them getting up for a derby and getting up for their home support. But I don't see them as being, the same way we spoke about MacArthur, I don't fear Western Sydney at any point. I think each of the City games we've watched against them were pretty comfortable. And at the start of the season, that first kind of 5-6 game period, it was about them being difficult to break down. They weren't thumping teams, but they were kind of grinding out little results here and there by being difficult to break down. Now that has disappeared, and I don't think they do enough with the ball going forward and in possession, other than quick transitions, to really kind of make use of that. Having said that, Kamau's in fantastic form. Mitch Duke is, I think, one of the best strikers in the league. They do have quality and they do have options there for me to be proven wrong. But for me personally, I only see them moving down.
Interesting. I mean, I think what you touched on with the Derby, I think that's going to be very revealing as well. I mean, let's not forget they lost 5-4 to the Victory the week before that as well, which is in all regards a terrible result. So if that Derby win can be a turning point, then they're a realistic shot. But if we look at these games that are coming up, it's tough. Again, like Western United, they've got a couple of 50-50s in there, but then they've also got 3 games in particular where you see them dropping points. So let's go through them. Western United, we think, is going to be a draw.
Yep, correct.
We'll say they beat Perth.
No, I'm saying they lose to Perth.
Oh, you reckon?
Yeah, I think this is the only place that Perth picks up points for the remainder of the season, really, in their run home. But I think, Western Sydney don't travel well. I think the same way that we spoke about how important Cooper Stadium is for Adelaide United, how important Redcliffe is for Brisbane, I put it the same way for Western Sydney. I think if it's not at Bank West, they can't do it. And more about that in their next game as well.
Well, their next game is against Sydney FC. So what are we picking there?
Loss, because that's not at Bank West. If it was at Bank West, I think they can compete. But when it's away from home, I don't think they can hang with Sydney.
The Wellington... Okay, so hang on. So we've got... So far of their next 3 games, we've only got a draw. Taking on the Wellington Phoenix.
Loss.
Loss?
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm just saying loss.
All right, okay, cool. So they have winless in their next 4. Brisbane and Adelaide, are they going to beat either of them?
Nah. I told you, it's not a nice thing, but at a certain point, we do have to call out the teams that are not playing well. And we spoke about talking about momentum in football and results, and not just results, but how well are you playing? And they're not playing well.
Yep. Okay, all right. Well, let's go with that. So they've got, according to that, 1 point. You're giving them 1 point.
I'm giving them 1 point. I'm happy to change. You are as big a part of this as I am. We can change and adjust as we need. Where do you think they pick up points?
Well, so let's say they get their 1 point. All right. So they're obviously not making the finals. If we mark them a little bit kinder, let's say they beat the 2 teams below. Let's say they beat Perth and they beat the Phoenix. That gives them 7 points, which takes them up to 35. So that I think is probably a realistic best case, but I can see you smirking there. What do you think, man? What do you think?
It's still not enough for finals. Spoilers, 35 points is not enough. 40 is the minimum, and then there's a couple of teams on 39, but we'll talk about that at the end.
All right.
But
so, well, then let's say...
I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they beat Perth. Let's say they beat Wellington. But then that kind of transitions into our discussion with Wellington, where I think, depending on where their games are played, is going to have a huge impact on the run home. So Western Sydney is away for them. But up to you. I'll give you the reins for that one. You're picking Perth. Western Sydney Wanderers to beat Perth and to beat Wellington.
Well, potentially, yeah. But what I'm saying is, so best case scenario, we think that, if they get results against the 2 teams below them, that gives them 7 points, which, as you just said, is not good enough for finals. So we can just put a line through them and say, look, we don't think they're going to make it. If they are, they're going to have to start beating those teams above them, Sydney, Brisbane, and Adelaide, and Western United as well, which we just can't quite see happening at this point. So I think that's what we say for Western Sydney. They're going to have to really start pulling some rabbits out of the hat, and they're going to have to beat Sydney, Brisbane, and Adelaide to make finals. So
if they want, maybe I can put this another way. If they want finals football on 28 points, they need 4 wins, and they're not going to get 4 wins based on their run home.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. I think that frames it nicely. I think it does. Well, let's look at the next team as well, Wellington Phoenix. So they are also on the outside looking in when it comes to the final race. They sit in 9th on 26 points. And again, we mentioned at the start, I find it remarkable that they even are in finals contention, given at the start of the year how difficult they found it. They're at, in the bottom 4. I mean, they still are in the bottom 4, but this time they've got more room to grow. So if we have a look at their next games, it's tough as well. They've got Adelaide, Melbourne City, Western Sydney. Oh, sorry, hang on. I've got all muddled up here.
Western United, Western Sydney, Perth Glory, and Macarthur.
Yeah.
You got it. You can get there eventually.
I got muddled. So Adelaide United, Melbourne Sydney, Western United, Western Sydney Wanderers, Perth Glory, Macarthur. This is the drama you have when you have Western and then West in your run sheet. So shame on me. But anyway, so having a look at that, they're on the outside looking in. Can you see them? So what we think? We said the Wanderers need 4 wins to make the finals. Wellington would need 5 based on that logic. Can you see them getting 5?
No, but I can see them going close and getting 4 because the difference here, I don't see them beating Adelaide in Adelaide, to be completely honest, and that game's later tonight, and they'll probably turn around and win that 4-0 now and make us look like idiots, but I don't see them beating Melbourne City at Amy Park. Maybe if it was in New Zealand, they could do it. I see them beating Western United purely because it's their return to New Zealand football. And I think Western United should be able to get out of Melbourne. I don't know where they're playing between now and then, if they're in New South Wales at any point, but they should be able to get across for it. Western Sydney, I have them beating. You don't. You have them losing that game. I think they will beat Perth Glory in New Zealand, which they 100% should, because Perth will be in real shit houses about travelling over there, so fuck Perth Glory. And then I think they finish off the season in a huge game against Macarthur, and I think potentially that one would maybe come down to, what team is better positioned to really make a run for the 6. If both of these sides need wins and they're going out to try and win the match to get themselves into a top 6 scenario, I think they potentially can win that game against Macarthur. But if Macarthur don't need a win to get top 6 and they sit on the edge of their 18-yard box, it'll become very difficult, I think, for the Knicks to try and break them down based on the way their structure and their setup works.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for them to make the finals. I think it is going to be a bridge too far. So, again, if they win their last 4, that's 12 points. That takes them to 38. We mentioned before 40 seems to be that magic number for making the top 6. And if they win those last 4, they're still not going to get there. And that leaves them needing wins against Adelaide and needing wins against City. And that's also assuming that they're going to win the last 4, which we're not convinced that they would do either. So similar to Western Sydney, I think we can put a line through Wellington and say they are not likely. Well, we might not say that they categorically will not make the finals. We will not say that, but it is very unlikely. Do you agree?
I'll go with that. So we're saying 3 wins from their last 6 to get them to a point where they don't make finals, unfortunately. Sorry, Knicks fans, but yeah, someone unfortunately has to miss out, and I think it is them. I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Let's move on to the bottom 3 sides. So these teams, I think we can categorically say none of them will make finals. Perth Glory, the Melbourne Victory, and the Newcastle Jets. So let's frame this a little bit differently. This is the race to avoid the wooden spoon. So looking at Perth, they have a bunch of games in hand. They still have to play the Melbourne Victory, Western United, Western Sydney Wanderers, Adelaide, Macarthur. I've got in here they play themselves, so that's not right. They play the Jets and I think the Phoenix, sorry.
And the Raw. Yeah, so they've got 8 remaining, the most with Brisbane Raw. And they've got, I think, 2 games that are still to be confirmed. That last game against Brisbane, which is currently slated for the 2nd of June, and then one on the 5th of June against the Glory to close out their season. Against Newcastle to close out their season. So a lot of football to come, but we've not given them any wins, I think, so far when we've talked about other teams. So there's a lot of L's to put in these columns.
Yes. Well, let's have a look at, so the big games remaining are going to come against the Victory and the Glory. The Glory. Jeepers. Sorry. The Victory and the Jets, who they both still have to play. If we look at the table, they're on 19 points. Melbourne Victory below them on 15, and the Jets on the bottom at 13. So if they can beat the Victory and they can beat the Jets, I think they obviously would avoid the wooden spoon there. Would you agree?
Yeah. Do you think they will beat the Victory and the Jets?
Yes. That was a long pause. I had to do a lot of thinking there. I think they definitely beat the Jets. The Victory, I don't know. Sorry, that's slated to be in Melbourne, that one as well, correct?
The Victory and the Victory and Jets or Glory and Victory?
Glory and Victory.
It is in Perth.
Oh, it is in Perth.
Yeah,
sorry,
it's this Sunday.
Okay, then I think they win that, and then I see them beating the Jets as well.
Okay.
So if they get those 6 points, when we were talking about, the race to make the finals, if they were to lose all their other games, which based on our predictions, I think they more or less were doing, maybe a draw, that takes them up to 25. So that would mean the Jets would need to pick up 12 points to surpass them, which I think would be unlikely. Would you agree?
Yeah, I could see them, but at the same time, I could see them losing to Newcastle and Victory.
Oh, absolutely.
They're dire at the moment.
All these teams are capable of losing all their games remaining. So let's sort of frame them all together then. So if we have a look at the Victory, they still have to play Perth, Macarthur, Sydney, Adelaide, Western United, and Melbourne City. Correct?
Yeah,
I'm really doubting myself now. I thought I had everything.
You are correct, and that final game of the season still to be confirmed, still showing as the 5th of June. So this is a tough one. I could see them picking up some points throughout the course of the remainder of the season. I think the most likely would be Perth and Macarthur. I don't see them beating City. I don't see them beating Sydney away. I don't see them beating Adelaide anywhere, and I don't really see Western United losing to them, given the way that Western United's season's kind of playing out and the fact that I'm picking them and trying to sneak their way into the top 6. So, I don't know. Like, we can either change that result we just gave to Perth and give it back to the Victory, or make it a draw or something, or we can say that they are effectively going to lose the remaining games of the season, which is, I think, what we've currently got listed down.
Yeah, I think more or less that's what is going to happen. I think Perth will beat the Victory, but just for argument's sake, if the Victory were to win, we think they're only going to get a draw after that. That would take them to 4 points. Due to their horrendous goal difference, they would still finish behind Perth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's assuming that they beat Perth, who I don't think they will. So if we think that best case scenario 4 points, not 4th. Best case scenario 4 points, more realistically probably only 1. Let's look at the Jets next and their games.
Sorry, where was the 1? Where was the 1 point?
Oh, where was the 1 point? Macarthur.
Okay, so I think we have to change our Macarthur result from earlier, but that's okay. That's fine.
Oh, no. We don't have to change the Macarthur. I'm just saying that realistically, 1 point is probably what they're likely to get. I don't know who that's going to come against, whether it's Perth or Macarthur, but they're likely to only get one or 4.
But it does have a bearing on the wooden spoon race, which transitions, I guess, into our next team that we're going to have a look at.
It does. The Newcastle Jets. Let's have a look at their remaining fixtures. So they've got a tough run where they still have to play Sydney FC, the Central Coast Mariners, the Brisbane Roar, Melbourne City, the Mariners again, and then they end the season with Perth. I cannot see them winning any of the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, any of the first 5. They're not beating Sydney. They're not beating the Mariners. They're not beating Brisbane. They're not beating City. And they're not beating the Mariners again. Maybe they can pull a result out of the bag, a draw or something in an F3 derby. But if we're going purely based on favourites, cannot see them winning them. So that's 0 points from the next 5 games, which if we have a look at the current table means they would have to beat Perth to have a shot at finishing off the bottom.
Oh, I think they do it.
Oh,
last game of the season in Newcastle. Perth have not travelled well. They'll have nothing to play for. because they're not finishing the bottom will be secure. I have a sneaking suspicion that the Newcastle are going to, and like you mentioned, they could scramble a result against the Central Coast Mariners because they play them twice, and that is a big derby game. And we spoke about Western Sydney picking up points randomly in a derby game. We've spoken about Melbourne Victory potentially trying to pick themselves back up against Melbourne City to close off their season on a high. So I think in that derby atmosphere, that is kind of like a little bit of an equaliser. And we know that Central Coast aren't the Central Coast they were 10 weeks ago. So yeah, I can see them beating Perth on the final day of the season and getting off the bottom of the league.
All right, so who finishes bottom then? Because again, we're starting to get into all these hypotheticals.
Well, we can go into that now if you want. I'll just need one moment to throw an image together.
All right, that's it. So who do you think will finish bottom then?
All right, Branson. So jumping into this not at all highly skilled Excel spreadsheet that we've been updating with all of our results and picks throughout the course of this discussion. So the current order that you can see here on the table is the current ladder position as teams currently sit. So their current points total is what you can see here in the second column. Their games remaining, what we think the results are going to be for them in those games, and we have double checked it, but if we've gotten any wrong, please let us know in the comment section below or over on Twitter that we haven't got any contradictory results here. So everything, if there's a win here for Melbourne City, there's a loss for the corresponding team that they're playing against. The projected points, we're now going to hit this sort and filter, would see teams finish in this order. Melbourne City, top of the division, winning 6 of their last 7 games for 58 points, and 11-point buffer to them, down to Brisbane Roar, that we have projected will finish with 47 points and get that top 2 finish, which I know you didn't see coming. Adelaide United in 45 points, finishing in 3rd. Sydney FC, 42 points in 4th position. Central Coast Mariners in 5th spot on 40 points. This is where it gets interesting, right? So at the moment, as things currently stand, MacArthur do sit in the top 6, but they've got a negative goal difference. So depending on the 2 games that they play and the draw that they pick up and the defeats that they incur, goal difference will potentially separate themselves and Western United. As things stand now, Western United would actually finish above them based on current goal difference, but there is potential that there's that goal difference swing. So you maybe put Western United up into that top 6 scenario, MacArthur being the unlucky loser, losing on goal difference there. Then down to Western Sydney Wanderers on 35 points, finishing in 8th spot. Wellington Phoenix also on 35 points, finishing in 10th spot. Again, because they are separated, or they're on the same points, it would just be down to goal difference. How much do the Western Sydney Wanderers win by in their 2 victories? How much do Wellington win by in their 3 victories throughout that period? Then the bottom 3, Perth Glory finishing in a 10th spot with 25 points. Newcastle Jets finishing in 11th on the last day of the season with 16, and finishing on the bottom of the league with 15 points for the season, Melbourne Victory. I know there's a few that you winced at as I was reading them out as potentially not being close to the reality, but who there do you think is the biggest surprise, and where do you think maybe we might have got it wrong and need to relook at?
The biggest surprise, I think, is the Newcastle Jets finishing off the bottom. You know, it's so difficult to predict some of these results, and you're throwing out hypotheticals, we're throwing out like best case scenarios for some of these teams. And I think when we look at Brisbane, I think they are a great example of best case scenario. Like, they've got 8 games to play, and we have them losing 1 of those 8. So for them, it is with the way we've got the ladder currently at the end of the season, it is very much a best case scenario result for Brisbane. And then you look at the Victory, losing all 6 of their remaining games doesn't get much worse than that. So that is very much a worst case scenario for them. So I think but
here's what I'd say. The only way I could see Victory winning a game in their last 6 is if they played one of Newcastle, Perth, Wellington, Western Sydney, or MacArthur during that period. So I'm actually going to see if we can do this. I'm going to put Western United up into the top 6 because I think that makes more sense.
I was that was going to be my other one correction, because we know Western United already have a better goal difference.
Yep.
If they are to win 3 remaining games, that would increase more than MacArthur's would in their 2. Logic would suggest, but then MacArthur could steamroll some teams, or some tough losses for Western United could see their goal difference take a hit. But I think that would be a more realistic swap. So I agree. I think that's good that we've done that. The Victory, I mean, they do play Perth and they do play MacArthur. So, I don't know. It's going to be tough. That last City game, if we're talking about the Victory to end the season, if it means knocking City out. Oh, sorry, not knocking City out. If it means stopping City from potentially winning the title and coming off the bottom, that could be huge.
All right, let's say that they get a draw, right? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Let's say that what will City finish on then? 56 points and pushes victory up to 16 points. They'll still lose on goal difference.
Yeah, they were. Their goal difference.
How do you want to break their heart? Do you want to break their heart via goal difference or break their hearts via the points differential? So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they pick up a point from their last 7.
Yep.
Newcastle have one grand final remaining, one game at home to close out the season to capture the hearts and minds of their fan base and avoid the mythical wooden spoon, which doesn't actually really mean anything. But I guess there are FA Cup ties now, and that would see the Knicks playing against Melbourne Victory and the Glory playing against the Jets for those 2 remaining spots in the final 32 as things currently stand. So there's a little bit there, but nothing too huge or too interesting. The big one for me is like the way that you called out Brisbane as being like an ideal scenario. I also kind of think it's an ideal scenario for Adelaide. And it's maybe potentially like an ideal scenario for Sydney as well. Like I think they're only losing once in their last 6. One, it gives them the credit that I think we want to pay to them where they are tough to beat and they are experienced. But then, like if they win that last game of the season against Adelaide United, like how does that change the makeup of them getting above Brisbane? If they get a good result against Brisbane during that run home, like what happens in that period? To me, the big part is who's playing mostly bottom half of the table teams, because at most sides we did say we're going to beat Perth, Newcastle or Victory, and the more times you get to play those 3 teams, I think the better a position you're in heading into that last game of the season. And then the differentiator for this middle of the table portion, which is basically Central Coast, I think, all the way down to Wellington Phoenix, is what results do we think they're going to get against each other? And where are we going to have those 6-point swings between a team that picks up 3 points and a team that doesn't? I think that top 4, I'm quite confident in. For me, the next kind of 5 spots, really, mathematically speaking anyway, those are the big ifs, buts and maybes. I think those top 4, to me, if you're going to ask me, have been the best 4 teams in the division when they're playing their best football so far this season. So, yeah, it may not shake out with these exact points, but I do think the positioning is actually pretty close.
I think it's pretty close as well. I think I agree that top 4 will be the top 4, but in what order, it's hard to tell. I think Brisbane, when we were talking again about their best case scenario, I think they have the toughest fixture list still remaining. I think Adelaide and Sydney have more favourable matchups that they're more likely to win ahead of them. So I can see Brisbane, of those teams with the current positions we have, I can see Brisbane being the most incorrect. I could see them finishing 4th. But I think the big thing as well, something that we can't really predict and that we can't really account for, is going to be form. I mean, when we've got Western Sydney taking on Adelaide United, some of those 50-50 games, it's really going to depend on which way the coin lands. Is it a win? Is it a loss? Is it a draw? It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out, mate. What do you think?
Look, so this is the other part. Like, we're releasing and recording this episode on the 7th of May. These games, all of these 7 and 8 games, are expected to be finished by the weekend of the 5th of May, 5th of June. So 4 weeks. So Brisbane's got a lot of football to play during that period, and maybe fatigue is an issue. Maybe we haven't really given credence to that. Maybe Brisbane playing that amount of football throughout that period, well, it can be a negative. And say that, hey, they're super fatigued and they haven't got that good squad depth and they can't really rotate at the moment. They're picking up knocks and injuries and whatever else. Maybe it, is a positive at the same sense where they're not overthinking matches and they're just going out and playing their natural game. And I think when they are more fluid, less rigid, they are a better team. But then same thing for Melbourne City, same thing for Adelaide United. They've got Wednesday, Sunday games for quite a few weeks here. So maybe someone like a Sydney FC or a Central Coast that already has points on the board and only 6 games remaining, maybe they're going to be in an advantageous position because they get 7 days to then scout a team properly and set up for them and do a full week's training. So yeah, it could ebb and flow. We could be miles off it, but for me, I think this is my top 6 pick. Maybe the positioning just changes just a little bit as to who's anywhere really between, I think, those 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th positions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the biggest hard luck loser from the forecast results we have there would be, I know I said the Victory finishing bottom, and that would also be the first time in their history that they've finished on the bottom of the table. It would not be the first time the Jets have, but it would be a first for the Melbourne Victory. But is MacArthur, they sit 3rd at the moment, and based on all the results around them, we have them missing the finals. And Just not to just revisiting them, they still have to play Victory, Perth, the Mariners, Western United, and Wellington. And we said it before, they really could win all 5 of those. We don't think they will. We have some mixed bag results: 2 wins, a draw, and 2 losses. But man, I'm excited just to see how this plays out. I don't know about you. This is going to be.
This is our next 4 weeks. This is our next 4 weeks of content. Just redoing this 4 times so that we can try and get it right and try and figure out how it's going to work out. I'd give a shout out to the Knicks as well. Like, I think they had such a poor off-season and pre-season program because they weren't able to train, and then they weren't able to travel, and they found out it was very late in the off-season. I think people forget that they actually made the decision and the movement across to Wollongong. So maybe if this season was another 3 weeks longer, maybe then Wellington come back into that conversation. Maybe if we had, instead of 26 games, 30 games, maybe the different projections that we see here are entirely different. But yeah, I think they are probably also an unlucky loser. I think Western Sydney had all the chances in the world to be a top 2 side, and they've kind of ruined it for themselves. But yeah, it should be fascinating. I have no doubt there will be twists and turns that you and I haven't seen coming, and that there will be changes to this different to what we've seen. But at least we've got the guts now to put it out there on the internet and see if it actually comes true.
That's it, mate. We've got our credibility on the line. None of it. Can you say
Exactly.
that? All the tiny amount of credibility that we do have based on our expertise, which from previous weeks we have shown not to necessarily be extensive.
Absolutely.
I think is a polite way of putting it. But mate, I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the podcast. Is there anything else that you want to touch on?
No, I think we've covered everything off. Now I just want these games to come thick and fast. It's not like Football Manager where I can watch a week's worth of games with a couple of clicks of a button. We have to wait now. There's a fantastic game coming up tonight. There's a few huge fixtures that we've already spoken about coming up this weekend. So just really enjoying the season. And I will be a little bit sad when it eventually comes to an end. I'm sure we'll miss it once it's gone.
Absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. We could be totally wrong. We could be spot on. It's going to be an incredible journey over the last quarter of the season as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for listening and bearing with us and going through all these results with us. Let us know in the comments as well. Hit us up on Twitter. Where do you think teams are going to finish? Who do you think we got right? Who do you think we got wrong? Is there anyone we've been too harsh on? Are there any teams potentially like Brisbane that we've been too soft on, that we've given too much credit? Let us know. Throw in your ladder predictions as well for the remainder of the season, and we'll compare them all at the end of the year. We'll see if anyone gets it right, Shauno.
We absolutely will. And yeah, please hit us up. Links in the description below to both of our Twitter accounts, to the reserve team, all that sort of stuff. We may even, once this is live, post this so that people can kind of compare their own different ladder setups, what they think is going to happen with the games remaining. But yeah, it's just fascinating to have a conversation. I love this game. It's the best league in the world, Brent.
It is, mate. It's very, very exciting. If you want to follow more of this great league and this great game as well, check out the reserveteam.com.au, your home of all Australian and New Zealand football content. We cover everything from the A-League to the W-League, to kits, to grassroots. We've even got, a number of referees providing a unique perspective on the game as well. Check us out on thereserveteam.com.au. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, hit us up on Twitch as well. Don't forget as well to watch the weekend recap on Tuesday nights. Sean, you and Stephen will be breaking down all the results, talking about all the big talking points, everything that needs to be discussed from what I'm sure will be a mega weekend of A-League football. But once again, everyone, thank you very much for watching and tuning into this week's episode of the Reserve Team Podcast.